Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you happen to be. I'm going to do a little tutorial here on how I go about stacking high-resolution lunar images in Autostakkert. I've looked around at some of the tutorials that are available, and some of them seem to be a little bit out of date. Some of them are a little bit confused. So I thought I would just go through the process of what I do myself. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if you don't have Autostakkert, let's get it. So search for Autostakkert download. It'll be like the first hit. Autostakkert is written by an amazing guy. He makes it available for free. He's named Emil Kreykamp. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but this is his website, www.autostakkert.com. And that's the guy. And I highly encourage, if you do end up using Autostakkert, as I do, for all kinds of things, planetary imaging, lunar imaging, solar imaging, really come here and donate. I've donated a few times. I'm going to continue to donate periodically. This is all freeware, and without it, doing this kind of imaging would be much more difficult. There are other tools available, but in my opinion, Autostakkert is the best. So Autostakkert 4 is the one you want. If you are stuck using Autostakkert 3 or even older, you really need to move on to 4. I know it's technically still so-called early beta version, but you can see that it's on version 11 already. It's become actually very stable. I have, there's a couple tiny little things that I've noticed about it, but they don't affect the performance, and they're really not an issue. And the reason that you want Autostakkert 4 is it's just so much faster than Autostakkert 3. It's unbelievably fast. So you can download it here, and once you unzip it, there's no install file. You just run Autostakkert, the exe that comes with it, and you're running Autostakkert. So let's jump in. My presumption here is that you have shot some high-resolution lunar images, and you have shot them in one of two formats, preferably SIR, S-E-R. The other one that you can shoot in is AVI. By the way, Autostakkert is capable of stacking other formats. You can stack individual images, you can stack PNGs, you can stack TIFFs, you can stack FITS files. You can, if I remember correctly, you can even stack MJPEG movies, but just don't. They're compressed, and you're not doing anything but stacking compression artifacts. So you want to use an uncompressed format, and that's going to be a SIR or an AVI that's been recorded by, hopefully, a dedicated astronomy camera. You can, of course, stack movies that come out of your DSLR, your mirrorless camera, your Canon. You can stack still frames, but really we're talking about high-resolution imaging here. And to get the kind of results that I like to get for high-resolution images, like you see my desktop background here, you really want to be using a dedicated astronomy camera that can shoot high-speed video in an uncompressed RAW format. And the preferable of the two is SIR, S-E-R. It's an unusual format. People say, well, why do you want to use SIR? And the reason is, if something happens during the capture of an AVI and it crashes, that AVI is pretty much lost. It can be recovered, but you need special software, and it's a pain in the butt. If you use SIR, all of the data up until the point that it crashed is still available and can be recovered and stacked easily. There's nothing wrong with that SIR file. It will still work just fine. So once you've installed Autostakkert, navigate to wherever it is, double-click on the exe file. I have stuck it here in my taskbar, Autostakkert, and I'm going to click on it. So this is what Autostakkert looks like. So you have a frame window, and you have over here, let's just call it the main window. And I'm going to show you a couple of ways to get data in here. One, you can go to File, and you can open the data browser. Right? So the data browser allows you to browse to your captures. And for example, I have 3 here on my capture drive. And if you click on them, it will show you what the preview of each of them looks like. So you'll see this look black. Well, it's because it's previewing at 100%, and this is a 20 megapixel image that has been captured with my ASI 183MC. Not Pro, by the way. It is not the cooled version. So there's a preview, and let's jump to another. These were all captured on the same night. This was going to be a full mosaic, but the clouds moved in. So I only got 3 captures in the can. And there we are. So we can, oops, misclick. We can select multiple of these if we want to. And then we could close and process data. That's not going to automatically process it. It will just move back to the main window of Autostakkert and let you proceed. So that's one way to go about doing it. And we can deselect these as well. And I'm just going to close and show you a different way of doing it. So another way of doing this is you can just go to your drive where you've captured your images, and you can navigate directly to the files. I think this was the 13th. And you can grab one or all of these files and just drag them into Autostakkert. And it will think for a moment, and it will show you the first one in chronological order by the capture time. Okay. You can, of course, go to Open Images and also just browse and choose them. I like to drag and drop inside, although I'm trying to get into the habit of using the data browser because it is brand new for Autostakkert 4, and seeing those previews really is nice. I like that. So it reminds you of, oh, that's what this capture was. That was this section of the moon, that was this crater, that was this region. So there are, by the way, there are a lot of features in Autostakkert that I don't use. And there are some features that I'm not going to cover in this video because they're not relevant for this process, the workflow for high-resolution lunar imaging. For example, I am not going to cover planet stabilization because that's for stacking planets. You can use it to stack the full moon if it fits inside the entire frame. But I'm just going to work my way through the various settings. So let's start with color. If you are shooting with a mono camera, first of all, if you're shooting with any camera, you can usually just leave this on auto detect. You can leave it on auto detect 100% of the time unless it detects it wrong. And that can happen very rarely, usually due to interactions with the capture software that wrote the videos in a funny way, so that the information about the correct Bayer matrix for debayering your color camera, if you don't know what that means, Google on Bayer matrix and debayering, and you'll find out what it is. But if the software has written the image in a funny way that, for example, flips it, you might end up using a different Bayer matrix. These days, those sorts of kinks are very rare. Most of the software out there has worked this out. So you can leave it on auto detect. One note about this, a lot of people like to image the moon in mono. I don't. It is full of color, and I like to capture that color and bring it out. But a lot of people like to image the moon in mono. And some people image the moon with a color camera intending to convert it to mono somewhere along the way. And I have seen people on YouTube doing tutorials that use a color camera and set this to grayscale. Do not do that. If you want to convert to grayscale, that's fine. That's up to you. But do not do that. What you will end up with is a very obvious checkerboard pattern that comes out in the final stack, and that will be the Bayer matrix, and you do not want to have that show up. So just leave it on auto detect, or if you have to, force it to the correct Bayer matrix. One last word about RGB here. If you do have a video or frames that you're stacking that are already debayered, and they are full RGB images, it should auto detect that as well. But if you need to, you can force it to that as well. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is one of the advanced options that I use. And I'm just going to go through my entire workflow. So this is not like a beginner intro. You can treat it like a beginner intro because I'm going to cover everything, but I'm also going to show you all of the options that I personally use. And one of the options that I personally use is, you can see that this one you usually don't need to worry about with lunar imaging. This is nice for planetary imaging, but I leave it checked on because it doesn't hurt anything. I'm going to jump into experimental features and parameter tuning. And the only thing I want to look at here is pre-processing. It's called vertical blur and horizontal blur. And you say, well, why would I want to make the image blurrier? This is only done during pre-processing, and it's a way of denoising the image so that you get better alignment. That's all it is. The image, as you captured it, is probably only a few milliseconds of exposure. It might be 5 milliseconds, it might be 10 milliseconds, but it's only a few milliseconds. And what that means is that there's actually quite a bit of noise in the image. And sometimes during alignment of the frames, Autostakkert's algorithm can actually lock onto the noise. It can particularly lock onto fixed pattern noise that comes from your sensor itself. Some sensors are known to have this. My ASI 183MC is such a sensor, and if I don't account for it, then I may notice, particularly in smooth areas of low contrast, that Autostakkert can actually lock onto the fixed pattern noise of the sensor, and I'll get sort of a grid pattern that will appear in some regions, and it will look almost as if the image has been printed on canvas. Well, I don't like that. So what do we do about that? We turn on this pre-processing setting, vertical blur, horizontal blur. It doesn't take a lot, and it's also not very sensitive to the number that you use here. You can use 1, you can use 2. I like 1.5. It's fine. And that will ensure that a little bit of smoothing, a little bit of denoising is applied to the frames before they are aligned, and that will prevent Autostakkert from locking on to any fixed pattern noise in your image, and it should make those sorts of artifacts go away in the final stack. If you see those sorts of artifacts and you're not using this setting, try using this setting. I won't guarantee that'll fix it, but you should try it. So I leave this on all the time, regardless of what camera I stack with. It doesn't hurt anything to have it on. Okay, so covered that setting, and let's start working our way down. So I have used an EQ mount, right? So, and I'm tracking at the lunar tracking rate. So my moon here stays pretty steady. You can also guide on the moon using the new PhD2 development version that allows you to do that. You can use feature tracking in SharpCap. It can be quite a bear to get feature tracking in SharpCap to be working correctly, but both of them will keep the moon stable in your field of view rather than having it drift through. By the way, it is possible to do even high-resolution lunar imaging without a tracking mount. It's just harder, and your results will not be quite as good, but you can do it. That's called the drift method, and maybe I'll cover that in another video. But for right now, we have a moon that is fairly stable, moves around a little bit, but the whole video is basically of the same region. So there is some movement, so the first thing that we have to do is stabilize this video. I want to comment briefly about PIP, P-I-P-P. This is PIP down here in my taskbar, by the way. PIP is a preprocessing tool that allows you to pre-process videos like this and do a bunch of other things. And a lot of people I see just incorporating PIP into their Lunar stacking workflow as though you needed to, and you do not. You virtually never need to use PIP. There are only certain special cases where you need to use PIP, and then you should use PIP. But in general, don't use it. You can skip right over it because Autostakkert is perfectly capable of stabilizing the image. So the default options here are the best. We want to be on surface, not planet. Obviously, we don't want to disable the stabilization. You might want to do that if you stabilized in PIP, but we're not going to do that. I'm going to leave on improved tracking because it's improved. It has better results. Find anchor is new for Autostakkert 4. This green anchor box, if you control click somewhere on the image, you can place the anchor box, and you want to place it in a region with high contrast, right? Because you want Autostakkert to be able to lock in on that region really well and stabilize the image. It is conceivable that you will get the highest quality region of the image closer to the anchor box, but I've never really noticed that effect. So I've seen some people concerned about it. I wouldn't worry about it. Although there is global seeing going on, and this is a rolling shutter camera, so if there's wind and the image is jostling, you get some rolling shutter effect. There is warping, so it's conceivable that farther away from the stabilization box, you might get somewhat poorer results in the final stack. I've never seen it. Don't really worry about it. So find anchor. Notice when I control clicked and manually placed this, find anchor turned off. Well, I'm going to turn it back on so that when I start stabilizing, Autostakkert will automatically find the region that has the highest contrast in the image and place the anchor box there. If you really want it on a particular crater, you can manually place it there. So what is crop? Well, the image is moving around from frame to frame. So on the outside edges of the image, you end up with some frames having data that is outside of other frames. So that means around the borders, you have regions where you can't stack all the frames, even if you wanted to, because some of the frames don't have data there because they're moving around. So crop will crop to a region of interest that is included in every single frame. Expand will try to use as much data as it possibly can, but you'll get lower quality regions outside of the crop region, right? Because they won't have data from all the frames, and you'll get noisier sections outside of the crop. So I typically just turn on the crop. Other people will use expand and then crop afterward. It's up to you. New for Autostakkert 4 is the automatic quality estimator. You usually don't ever need to turn this off. Okay, so usually Autostakkert 4, leave this on automatic. Don't mess with it. And the next thing that we're going to do, and I'm going to pause the video, is analyze. And we are back. It has been a long time since I made the first half of this video. Long time, like more than a week, I think. But here we are. We've analyzed our video, and let's talk about what we got. So after we ran the analysis, first of all, here's what Autostakkert is doing when you hit analyze. The first step that it does is it stabilizes the surface. So it takes that anchor box that either it found automatically or we placed, and it stabilizes the image based on that anchor box. So that now if we take the analyzed video and we sort of scrub through it, you'll notice the moon is no longer moving around. Okay, so it's in place. That's good. We need that for stacking. The next thing we need to talk about is the quality graph. So the quality graph, what Autostakkert has done is it has calculated a contrast measure on every frame. That's really what it's doing when it does quality estimation, is it has a contrast metric. So frames that have higher contrast are marked as higher quality, and frames that have lower contrast are marked as lower quality. That means, presumably, that they're blurrier. Be warned that if an image is dimmer, it will be marked, otherwise, all else being equal, it will be marked as lower quality. If a frame is brighter, all else being equal, it will be marked as higher quality. What that means is that as a cloud passes in front of the moon, for example, and the image gets dimmer, those frames are automatically marked as lower quality, which is good. So there is one thing to be aware of. If you poke around in the advanced settings here, you might see variable transparency recovery. You'll notice that's grayed out because I believe that's grayed out because I've already analyzed. Be very careful trying to use this. Sometimes people who have variable transparency and the moon is getting dimmer and brighter, they might try to correct that using VTR here. And what that does is it takes all of the individual frames and it normalizes them so they're all of equal brightness. Great. Except when you do that, the frames that were dimmer, they have less light, so they're inherently noisier. And then when you normalize all the frames, you make those frames brighter. Guess what happens? Those noisier frames get marked as higher quality because now they have higher contrast according to the metric, just from the noise. So that VTR, variable transparency recovery, will in fact end up marking the dimmer, noisier, generally worse frames as your best frames. So I don't use this and I don't recommend anybody use it. Okay, so it takes every frame in the video and calculates a quality metric. That's the gray graph. So the horizontal axis is time, or frame number, if you will. And the gray lines are the quality metric. You'll notice there's no scales. Okay, so what Autostakkert does, oh, and by the way, the green curve is what you get if you take all of the gray points and you sort them. Highest quality on the left, lowest quality on the right. So if you were to click on this graph, you'll notice it puts a green bar there, and look, it has moved the preview frame to that frame. So if I click over here, the preview frame is now 270. Okay? We can also take this guy and scrub him over to the left. So these frames are now quality sorted. How do you know that's the case? Because frames here is marked in green. If we click on that and it becomes black, now we're sorted by the original time ordering of the frames. Click back on it again and we're quality sorted. Okay? So let's talk about the vertical scale here. There's a lot of confusion about the vertical scale of the Autostakkert quality graph. The Autostakkert quality graph is always scaled such that the highest quality frame is located at the top. That's called 100%. That's not an absolute sense. That just means it's the highest quality, highest contrast frame in the data set. And the lowest quality frame is marked down here at the bottom of the graph, is 0%. That does not mean that its absolute quality is 0 compared to the absolute quality of the best frame. Where can you find the absolute quality? It is this unmarked little number right here, next to Q and a percentage. So Q means quality. This percentage means as a percentage of all the frames. So this is the best frame. It's better than 100% of all the other frames. If we take this guy and scrub him all the way to the last frame, which is 2000, you'll notice this is 0%. But the absolute quality number here is 35.4 compared to the absolute quality of the best frame of 82.5. So that actually sets the vertical scale. The offset from 0 here is not included in the graph. The range is about 50 in terms of absolute quality just from these numbers. Your numbers will be different. You'll have different size frames, you'll have a different camera, different optics, different field of view. The absolute quality number doesn't really mean anything at all except in comparison to other frames in the same video. Okay? So that sets the absolute frame. So the reason that we use Autostakkert is we want to stack up many frames, and people are sometimes confused about why we stack up frames. We stack up frames to get a sharper result. No, we don't. We stack up frames to reduce noise. Okay, stacking up frames actually will produce a blurrier result, and that's because unavoidably there is atmospheric turbulence, there is seeing. So the features in the video move and change. We can actually show that if we zoom this into 100% and grab the sky, and let's just move down to the center of the moon. You can see the actual full resolution of the chip. And then let's just sort this by the original ordering, and then we'll just play it. And what you'll notice is, due to seeing, the features on the moon move around. This is even after the moon has been stabilized. These features are moving around. So what we're going to do in Autostakkert is carve the moon up into, depending on your image scale, might be dozens, might be hundreds, might be thousands of small boxes. They're called alignment points. And for every one of those boxes, we're going to find the best, sharpest, highest quality frames, and we're going to average all of that little box for all of the best frames. That will produce a blurry result. But hopefully, you've stacked enough frames, the noise is low enough that you can recover the sharpness after the fact via sharpening, deconvolution of one method or another, which we'll look at later. Okay, so we are stacking to reduce noise. So that brings up the question, well, how much of the video are we going to stack? That is a very subjective that is a very, very, very subjective question to answer. If you ask 2 lunar imagers, you will get at least 3 answers. So what Autostakkert has done in sorting this is it's trying to use this graph to figure out, well, how many frames am I going to put in the reference frame? What is the reference frame? Well, the reference frame is a straight stack without all the alignment points, where it just takes the entire frame and it stacks some number of them. And the image that it produces is blurred, but it's low noise, and it becomes the reference image for stacking all of the other images. So the reference frame settings are down here. First of all, double stack reference frame, don't use that. You can use that under certain circumstances, mainly in solar imaging, white light solar imaging. It can be good there. Don't do it here. I'm not going to go into it. So a lot of people leave the reference frame on automatic, but I'm going to switch it over to manual just to show you what's under here. So the number of frames that Autostakkert is going to use to calculate the reference frame is 1319, and that's different for every video that you analyze. Okay, so it's going to take 1300 or so frames, and it's going to stack them up to create the reference frame. Where does this number come from? This number comes from one of 2 places. Either it's where the green line intersects the 50% mark, right there. or I believe it's 65%, or thereabouts. It is hard-coded to go no higher than about 65%, which is why it's in the neighborhood of 1,300 when I have 2,000 frames. Okay, so the 50% quality mark here would be, it's at about 80%, right? So what does the shape of this graph tell you? Unfortunately, it often doesn't tell you a lot. People put a lot of stock into the shape of the graph, but you can have very different data sets that produce very similar looking graphs. In general, if you have poor seeing, this 50% crossing will move to the left. And you'll have fewer frames that are above the 50% quality line. And if you have better seeing, it will move to the right, and you'll have more frames above the 50% quality line. But you have to be careful. So rather than going into a lot of complexities, I've seen a lot of rules. People will stack 10%, they'll stack 20%, they'll stack 25%, they'll stack 30%, they'll stack 50%. They will find where the quality metric goes above 65%, and they'll stack from there. They'll scrub through and find where that Q value is 65%, and then they'll stack that percentage of frames. What I like to do, just to keep things completely simple, is usually stack the number of frames that Autostakkert has chosen for the reference frame. Okay, so why do I choose the number of frames that Autostakkert chooses for the reference frame? Mainly the reason is to keep it simple. Like I said, there's a million different rules. And one thing that I've found is that people often seem to understack. They stack too few frames. And let me demonstrate that, at least in my opinion. So here we're looking at a frame that's about at the 50% crossing number. This is a higher frame with a lower quality than Autostakkert would use in the reference frame. So it wants to stack up to 1,319 here. I'm almost at 1,600. I'm almost at 80%. And we can just get a feeling for the quality, the sharpness of the frame just by looking at it. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to bounce it all the way back to 1. So there's 1. And there's 1,600. And you can see that it's slightly blurrier. Bounce back and forth between them a little bit. So yeah, it's worse. Autostakkert has done its job. However, it's not night and day. It's, I would say, kind of close. So I think people stack too few frames. And if you look at the shape of the graph, the trade-off is if you stack fewer frames, nominally they're sharper, but by stacking fewer frames you get a higher noise image with lower signal-to-noise ratio. If you stack more frames, you're stacking more frames with lower quality by definition, but you're also driving up the signal-to-noise ratio. And if we presume that we can recover detail from sharpening in post, where we've stacked up many frames and we've gotten a blurrier image, and we assume that generally that leads to some sort of Gaussian or perhaps multiple Gaussians. That's the
the basis of wavelet sharpening. Blurring within the image, well, the same is true of blurred individual frames. If we stack enough of them and our deconvolution is good enough, we should be able to recover from them. And I prefer to have a higher signal-to-noise ratio. So I like to look at the graph and a few things. I see where it crosses 50%. I see where Autostakkert wants to put the cutoff for the reference frame. Like I said, this is hard-coded around 65%, if I remember correctly. And the other thing that I look for is where does the slope of this line really turn over and start to plunge, right? Because up here at the left, we have a tail of high-quality frames that goes up above the diagonal. Then we have this diagonal here, and then we have a tail of low-quality frames that again diverges from the diagonal on the downside. And I like to see where does this really start to turn over hard. And I do want to, of course, avoid the worst of the worst frames. So in a situation like this, I would either stack the number of frames that Autostakkert has chosen for the reference frame, particularly if that number is not maxed out. Here it's maxed out, and it's maxed out at about 65%. So it's maxed out kind of way up here, something like that. A little bit to the right of that. Maybe actually more like that. Yeah, that's about right. Somewhere near 1300. So, and that would be fine. But if I want to increase the signal-to-noise ratio a little bit more, I could go all the way up to 80. And I would feel comfortable doing that with the data that I have here. And again, this is all a personal choice. It's up to you. The more frames you stack, the longer it takes to stack. The higher your signal-to-noise ratio. And if you have good enough deconvolution, which I believe I do, then I generally don't tend to worry so much about stacking more, quote, poorer frames, because I want the signal-to-noise ratio to be as high as I can get it without throwing in the garbage, you know, the tail of the distribution. Okay, so for the sake of argument then, I'm going to stack 1600 frames, because that's right about where I'm crossing my 50% line. And you can come up here to your stack options. First of all, you can choose the format. A lot of people like TIFF. I'm not a fan of TIFF. It seems to be a pretty brittle format. There's a bunch of different versions of TIFF that different software treat in different ways. PNG seems to be much more robust. This is a 16-bit per channel format, but you also have FIT. And if you don't know what FIT is and it scares you to use it, don't use it. Go ahead and use PNG. It's fine. I like FIT. GIMP, new image manipulation program, can read in FIT's files, as can the other software that I use. So I like to use FIT because it's 32 bits and you get a little bit higher bit depth. I don't know that it means a lot in some situations, but with lunar imaging, particularly near the terminator, we have very dark features that you're going to be trying to pull out of the blackness of the terminator by stacking up many, many, many frames. It can make a difference. You can end up with posterization down here, and you don't really want that. So I like to use FIT. And I'm going to stack up 1600 frames. You can enter up to 4 numbers of frames to stack, and you can also enter up to 4 percentage stacks, and it will do all of them. So if you're trying to decide the difference between, say, what Autostakkert wanted to stack for the reference frame, which was 1319, or 1600, you can enter both of those and then decide after the fact which one you like better. I'm just going to go with 1600. Not looking at my keyboard. Okay, moving down, RGB align. This does, let's get the tooltip to come up. This does a sub-pixel alignment between the red, green, and blue channel. This can be nice if you're imaging relatively low in the sky and you have atmospheric dispersion to deal with and you have not imaged through an atmospheric dispersion corrector. I leave it on by default. It does not hurt anything. Save in folders does exactly what it says. It will create a folder and put all the images, subfolder from where your SIR files or your AVIs are located, and it will put your final stacks in that folder. You can turn that off, leave it on as you want. There is these output options. You can come in here and there's a lot of settings that determine what the file name is going to be, what it's going to do with the stack after the fact. I don't think that too many people do very much with these anymore. You can leave them on the defaults, they're fine. I never touch them. The free field is just a text field that gets stuck into the middle of the file name. So if I wanted to put moon in here, because as you'll notice, the file name of the SIR file only includes the UTC time that it was imaged, the center time in the SIR file, and it does not include the target name. So I can just add that if I like. Let's talk about super resolution. This is, or drizzling. So drizzling is a method of taking the individual frames and aligning them, and I'm not going to go into the technical details, but because you have many, many frames, you can recover higher resolution than any individual frame. So drizzling is a method of producing a higher resolution output stack than the input video. However, this is greatly abused. I see a lot of people that drizzle everything by default, and that is probably a mistake. First of all, drizzling only works if your optics are undersampled. By undersampled, I mean significantly less than critically sampled. So critical sampling occurs when your focal ratio is 5 to 7 times your pixel size in microns. And I'm not going to go through the math of that either, but that is the case. And why is it 5 to 7? Well, it depends on seeing. If the seeing is a little poorer, then you're not going to be able to recover as much detail. If the seeing is better, you could recover more detail. So the poorer seeing result might be the 5x rule, where your focal ratio is 5 times the pixel size in microns. If better seeing, you might be able to get up to the 7x rule, where your focal ratio is 7 times the pixel size in microns. If you're above critical sampling, you will not record any more details. You'll just get a larger, softer, blurrier image. And that's because the amount of detail that you can record is determined by the aperture of the telescope, more or less. It also has to do with the central obstruction, but basically the aperture of the telescope. So the larger the telescope, the finer the details that you can resolve. All of the higher frequency details are filtered out by the finite size of the aperture. So it does not help to continue to Barlow up and produce a larger and larger image scale. You're not recording any more detail. The opposite end is if you're significantly undersampled. So if you're imaging and you're at your focal ratio is only 2.5 times the pixel size in microns, then you're undersampled and you may benefit from drizzling. However, even then, drizzling can work really, really well for mono cameras. They have a very high signal-to-noise ratio. If you were trying to drizzle data from a color camera, it is a different story. So a color camera has a Bayer matrix. You can see a little picture of the Bayer matrix up here. So every little grouping of 4 subpixels, well, they're not subpixels. Every grouping of 4 pixels, for example, has 2 greens, 1 blue, and 1 red. right? That's interesting. It looks like it's chosen BGGR, which I think is backwards for my camera. We'll have to see how it turns out. I'm going to leave it. Oh, that's because I forced it. Interesting. So there we go. What that means is the red channel, any individual frame in the red channel, only 25% of the pixels have data. The blue channel, only 25% of the pixels have data. The green channel, only 50% of the pixels have data. So what Autostakkert does is it takes however many frames that you are stacking, and it does subpixel alignment, and it allows the data from the red pixels, because they move around, even though it's, as you stabilize the image, you're moving the pixels relative to each other. So the red pixels are able to fill in the data, and the blue pixels are able to fill in the blue data, and the green pixels are able to fill in the green data. But as you can imagine, you need a lot of frames to fill in that data and produce a high signal-to-noise ratio. What drizzling effectively does, let's look at 3x drizzling, which is takes 1 pixel and turns it into 3. In fact, it takes 1 pixel and turns it into 9 because it becomes 3 by 3. So instead of 1 pixel out of 4 containing data in the red channel, when you do 3x drizzling, this 2 by 2 grid will become a 6 by 6 grid. In other words, these 4 pixels become 36 pixels, but only one of them in any individual frame has data in the red channel. That means the number of frames that you have to stack with the image moving around to fill in all of the data in those other 35 pixels in the red channel, one by one, from the 1 pixel in the red channel that has data, is extremely high. So the moral of the story is it is often prohibitive to stack enough frames with one-shot color cameras to produce a significantly more detailed result. You would need many thousands of frames to do a good job of it. And that can be difficult when you're shooting, for example, this camera that has 20 megapixels per frame, so that, for example, 5,000 frames is a 100 gigabyte file. It can be prohibitive to end up doing that. So the results, and again, if you're not undersampled, significantly undersampled, drizzling will not benefit you no matter how many frames you stack, because there's no more detail to be had if you're at critical sampling. I see people drizzling by default with one-shot color cameras, and it is just a mistake, in my opinion. And it takes a long time. It will take the stacking time and increase it by an order of magnitude. And it's just usually not worth it. So I very rarely will drizzle one-shot color data. The only exception is if I can get a lot of frames in the can and I am significantly undersampled. So if I'm shooting with a small refractor or something at f5 and the pixel size in my camera is 2 micron, for example, then I'm only 2.5 times the pixel size in microns, my focal ratio. So I'm significantly undersampled, and if I can get a few thousand frames in the can, which is easy enough to do in a situation like that, then I might go ahead and drizzle it. See what I get. Be warned, if you do drizzle one-shot color data, even if you do a good job, you're probably going to see artifacts in the results. You'll see a grid-like artifact, and you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to filter it out or blur it out. And another reason why I'm just really down on drizzling is all of the high frequency details that you're trying to recover. What happens when you blur out the artifacts? What happens to all that supposed extra detail when you have to blur away the artifacts it produces? So I'm very skeptical. Okay, so let's move on over here and talk about alignment points. So alignment points are, I'm just going to draw one over here. If I click on manual draw, I can click and drag and make an alignment point. And I can make them any size I want. I'm not going to use that. That takes a long time. I'm going to clear that, and I'm going to set an alignment point size of 200. And I did a study a few years ago of the benefits of smaller alignment points. If you use larger alignment points, and you can go larger than 200, some people don't realize this, but you can click this all the way up manually and go all the way up to 400, right? That's the maximum. If I just click on here, and I'm not drawing, I don't click and drag, I just click and I place those. So that's 400 pixels on a side. I did a study of, well, what size alignment point do I want? Because what happens with it, each individual alignment point, is Autostakkert can individually align on that box, and also it can take that micro stack of that alignment point and it can actually warp it so it matches its neighbors when it stitches the entire thing together to produce the final image. So to some extent, you want smaller alignment points because you get better fidelity in each little box. You get, you can, instead of warping this one box, you can warp 4 boxes in here and get slightly better results. On the other hand, if you go to too small of a size, then Autostakkert really starts to have difficulty aligning the individual boxes because there's not enough detail to be seen, right? So just to illustrate that, if we go up to 100% again, just somewhere here in the middle of the moon, and let's say that we have selected an alignment point size of 48. Let's put one there. You can see that in that box, there's almost no contrast whatsoever. So it's almost impossible to align that box correctly. The alignment in that box essentially just becomes random. And whatever detail might be in there that you could recover via stacking is going to end up being smeared out and lost. And you're going to end up with poor results by using too small of an alignment point. So the study that I did, I found that for high-resolution lunar imaging, the best value that I could find was 200. And that's a large enough box that generally there's always some details somewhere that Autostakkert can lock onto and correctly align. I found 100 did pretty much just as good a job as 200, but not any better. And going to 100 versus 200 quadruples the number of alignment points, and it takes longer to stack. So these values, by the way, they can be dependent on your image scale. So when I say 200, I'm specifically talking about high-resolution, critically sampled imaging. It seems to be the best number for me. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm just going to place the grid. The minimum brightness, by the way, if you were to set this significantly above 0, anywhere above 0, it's going to not place alignment points in the sky. Okay? I leave it on 0 when I am batch processing multiple videos because I want the image to be paved, because it's unclear whether or not Autostakkert is regenerating the alignment points between each video. It might be, but that's unclear to me, so I just leave it the way it is. I'm just going to hit place AP grid, and while it's thinking, I'm going to tell you what these two checkboxes are. It's already done. The replace will replace all the currently existing alignment points. If you turn this off, it will add the new alignment points to the old alignment points. Multiscale is actually a critical setting. You pretty much never want to turn this off. What this does, you'll notice these alignment points are much bigger than the 200 size alignment points. What it does is it creates or paves the image with 200 scale alignment points, and then it uses a larger scale and a larger scale all the way up to, I believe the maximum is 400. So I think this guy is a 400 scale box. And what that does is if it does end up placing a box somewhere that is a low contrast area and it can't align it very well and that area is going to end up blurry, it will instead use an alignment point that is larger, that has more features in it and higher contrast that it can align better. So this multi-scale setting produces really a much better result. Never turn that off. So now that I have alignment points, I'm going to talk about some of these other settings here. So I can turn the display of my alignment points off. They're still there. I can turn them back on. This is the histogram of the current frame. This is new for Autostakkert 4. You can turn that off if it's in your way. These guys, you never really have to deal with this scaling option. You leave it on auto and it's correct every time. I've never seen it wrong. You can, if you want, you can export frames, either the current frame or these settings are slightly different in Autostakkert 4. So this allows you to set the number of frames that you're going to, the percentage of frames, if you will, by quality that you're going to export. And to actually do that, you would click on this. So if you click here, it will export the current frame. And if you click here, it will export, for example, now 45% of frames. Those would be the top 45% of frames. There's no need to actually do that for Autostakkert processing. So I'm just explaining that. There is this brightness. Well, what is this? This affects the display brightness, but it does not affect the stacking, right? So I like this setting. I believe this setting is new for Autostakkert 4, at least I don't remember ever seeing it, which basically takes the image brightness and it takes the square root. And that's very close to applying gamma 2.2. So the brightness square root is essentially a gamma of 2. It's close to 2.2. So that's essentially very close to the translation between a linear image and a gamma corrected image. So for example, images taken by your phone or your DSLR are gamma corrected. Raw images taken by an Astrocam are not. They are linear. So they look very dark, they look very higher contrast, and if you want to see what the image looks like gamma corrected, this is fairly close. And this will actually affect the placement of alignment points if you've set a minimum brightness here that's non-zero. I just like to be able to see what's going on down at the terminator, right? Because if we set this, whoops, sorry. If we set this back at 1, everything gets very dark. This lets me see what's going on better with the terminator. Okay. So I've got a set of alignment points. I think probably when I changed this setting over here, I lost my analysis. It's letting me proceed, but it's probably going to reanalyze. So what I'm going to do, now that we have everything set, I have my alignment points generated. I'm going to click Stack. It's probably going to go through the surface stabilization and buffering analysis again, but that's okay because I'm going to pause the recording and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, I just wanted to take the opportunity here to jump in and show you what's happening. As you may recall, or maybe not, I can't remember when the first time I shot the video, I'm actually now batch processing all 3 videos. So it ran through the stacking of the first video and completed. And you can see the time that it took to complete all the steps. And if you were to add these all up, you would find the time that it took to actually finish stacking the video. And I was correct, it did go back and restabilize the image once I changed the Bayer matrix setting. But you can see there are 2 status bars. The top status bar are the stacks that it's creating. It's creating 3 stacks from 3 videos, so it's completed the first one. You'll notice I have a different image of the moon over here, and it is now going through and stabilizing that one as well. So it's going to stack that one, and then it's going to stack the third one, and I will probably come back and wrap this video up tomorrow. Good morning. It is the next day, and Autostakkert has finished stacking all 3 of these videos. If I go into my folder, you recall I used the option to save in folders, and here we are. There's my SIR files. There is a new directory called AS_F1600. That is for frames 1600. If it were, if I had stacked via percentage, it would be a slightly different format. Here it would have a P for percentage. And here we are. Here's my stacked fit files. And let's just grab one of them. Double click, it will open in GIMP. And we'll take a look at it. See what we got. And then I'm going to wrap up this video because I'm going to start processing in a separate video. When you open up a FITS file in GIMP, it will ask you how you want to combine the 3 channels. If you leave it on none, it will open the 3 channels separately as 3 different images, red, green, and blue, so we don't want to do that. So we're going to select this second option. The others you can just leave as they are. Open. And it thinks a moment, because it is a very large file, if you noticed. Each one of these is about 1/4 of a gigabyte. And there we are. Stacked image of the moon. As you can see, this has not been sharpened yet. But there's our stacked image of the moon. Until next time.